the intro music. Yeah! Woo!
Welcome back, everybody, to another Bad Crew video. And today we're going to be taking a look at 5 different crews, how they worked, why they didn't work, and what you could do to improve upon them. And we're also going to be trying to expound where we cover not just these high-level ships where we've been doing a lot of lately, because that's a lot of the screenshots I get, but also giving some of these crews from lower-level players for those new servers like 75, 77, 78, 81, 82, 200, because this game just launches new servers all the freaking time. So we're going to try to hit all that, and because of that, we're going to try to go semi-quickly, starting with, bam, this one right here. Now, it's obviously the one on the right that you're going to want to focus on. For those curious, the one on the left is actually not a bad setup, depending on the level of the Zao. So Zao there is giving you an increased mitigation for the Enterprise, so that is actually not a bad crew. And going with Bones is kind of a standard synergy thing. There's probably some other things better, but it really depends on the individual stats and the individual officers of that player. But if we look on the opposite side of the screen, that's where I want you to focus on. That is where we're going to run into a lot of our issues. And it's not that it's the worst crew in the world or anything by any means, but it's one of those where you can tell maybe the player just didn't understand, you know, how everything works. Let's transition. Let's take a look at Scotty. So if we take a look at Scotty, you'll notice the officer ability plus 60% to this ship's hull health. Now, yes, it works, but is that really giving a big bonus to a Horizon? It's honestly not. The reason being, and this is one of the biggest confusing marks for so many new players in the game, is that when it says 16%, that does not mean actually 16%, because it is working off base. The way that research works is you start with your base number. So that number is 1. So every bit of research and officer ability, etc., generally works as the following number. You're going to have base plus X, and that X can be Scotty's percentage, 16%. But what if you have research that's 80%? Well, obviously, Scotty's not going to feel very big if 16% to the 80 is simply getting added to. So the tricky thing with a lot of officers is, are they actually giving you what you need in terms of their bonus? And it might read like it's a decent bonus, but at the end of the day, many of them simply are not. To the point where most common and uncommon officers are unusable unless you know their very specific task. For example, let's take a look at Talon, who is in this one. Objective defense is a fantastic fight against hostiles that are interceptors. If it is a kinetic-based weapon that you're fighting against that's a red hostile, Talon's actually really good mixed with like Pike Moreau, Picard Beverly, Cadet Uhura, Cadet McCoy, etc. But as captain, simply for ship XP, I mean, not that it doesn't work, it does. It's just not something that you would typically run on a Horizon that is out to mine. Now, if you are trying to gain XP, well, that's one way to do it if you don't have Pike. So I guess at the end of the day, that one kind of works, but that would only actually work against a bounty hunter that was hunting your Horizon. And honestly, maybe that's what they were going for. And then finally, we've got Arcadi, which is a boost to shield health. Once again, this is such a small boost to the ship that it's, I hate to use the word inconsequential, but it simply doesn't provide much of an effect. And also keep in mind that it doesn't matter how much shields you have. Shields stop the same amount of damage regardless of whether they're at 20% or 100%. They're going to stop 80% of any non-mitigated damage coming to your ship. So if you've got them like that, well then, you probably don't need Arcadi. And it is going to be interesting to see if more lower level players use Arcadi, because the captain's ability, always enthusiast, when the shields are depleted, 50% chance of inspiring morale, just because as an early morale officer, which I do still really stress getting morale officers early, particularly Kirk through the faction store. Still curious to see if with the recent change to morale, burning, and hull breach, if he gets used more. I haven't really seen it. So there you go. There's just some basics for this first crew. We're going to move on to crew number 2 here, which is, well, it's a little bit of a doozy. Double Kirks and a con. And as you can see, this Enterprise was already a bit damaged. So not going to get, you know, I mean, it was going to be a lost fight. But if that Enterprise on the right side had been fully repaired, it still would have lost to a ship that was a tier lower. So the reason being is, one, the ship on the left has got better research. And you can tell by the power of the Enterprise on the left being higher, even though the tier is lower. So that player has done a little bit more into research, or the officer crew bonus is hitting it and the one on the right is not. But the one on the right now is not as, well, it's redundant. The reason it is redundant here, we'll pull up Kirk real quick and we'll move this so you can see. So bam, power of the internet. Right here, inspirational. At the beginning of each round, Kirk has a 75% chance, at least for me at rank 4, of doing 75% morale for 2 rounds. Well, here's the kicker. The Enterprise needs morale, so that's not a problem. The Enterprise wants morale. You almost always want some form of morale proc, whether it's Kirk, TOS Kirk, Marcus, you want morale on your Enterprise. So that's not the problem. The problem is you got 2. So now you've basically wasted an officer spot because you went for 2 officers that do the exact same thing. So let's take a look at TOS Kirk. Well, he's going to do 3D strategist when fighting players at the start of the round, and this is probably why he's captain. He does a damage reduction of your opponent based on the defensive stats of your officers. It is cumulative, so that's good. I mean, it does work. We've been using this for over a year now, and it's fine. But the second ability is at the start of each round, if the ship's health is above 30%, it inspires morale. So you got 2 officers doing the exact same thing at the officer slot. That's obviously wasting a very limited resource. You've only got 3 bridge slots in the game. And even with the lower deck officers being added, none of them, at least at the moment, have the ability to proc something like morale, hull breach, or burning. So because of that, well, you really need to get rid of one of these Kirks, whichever one you choose. Look at the Enterprise over on the left side of the screen, which is running a Honor Guard War for criticals to increase the amount of damage the Enterprise is doing, Kirk, and then TOS Uhura. That is a fantastic anti-Enterprise crew, and that is why they came away with a victory. So let's move on to the next one, because I feel like we're going a little bit too slow. There's way too much going on. So let's back on out, and then boom, the next one is a Burrell versus a Vidar. And the Vidar is pretty generically loaded out with a mitigation/shield boosting crew for OPC hunting. And the one on the right is doing a little bit of wild and crazy things. That is, and honestly, individually, these officers aren't bad. I have no problem with those officers individually. Let's transition this back on down. So we'll start with Burnham, who is intuitive when fighting players. Each time removes 30% of the total attack. That's not a big deal for me. The captain's ability, Steadfast, increases impulse speed. I can understand that. So I'm not going to gripe too much about Burnham. Maybe they were going for impulse speed. There are better impulse speed crews, but maybe that's what they were going for here with Burnham on the Burrell. So we'll let it live for now. But let's move on to the next part of that, which is going to be Saru, and then I'll do Galron as the last part of this discussion. So if we take out Saru, Saru is a common captain because when fighting players, every time your ship gets hit by a critical, he can reduce the critical hit chance. So he's a counter to things like Khan and Honor Guard Worf, especially with synergy. But as an officer here, when fighting players, decreases the opponent's weapons damage by 40%. Now that's granted, that's at rank 2. So it's not exactly the highest rank, but still, that's once again not a big boost. How can I tell you or give you an example how that's not a big boost? Well, your officer bonus on a tier 3 ship, or I'm sorry, a level, grade 3 ship like a Burrell is 300% at max. So if you're reducing it by 40%, you're not really reducing it that much. It's a very small, not that important. And what you'll find with a lot of officers is they've got a main ability that's really good and a secondary ability that just isn't. Now let's take a look finally at Galron, which is an officer I actually really like. Now, the key to Galron is what level is he? You see, I've got a tier 2 Galron, increases the shield deflection by 500% of the total crew health, which kind of does, I mean, it works here. I'm curious to the tier of this Galron. Now, the Vidar is a very good PvP ship, so let's keep that in mind. But there is a reason that this ship loses against the Triangle. The Interceptor class, which is what the Vidar is, should not have an advantage over the Burrell. The Burrell should have more or higher mitigation. And maybe it does with Galron. Maybe that Galron's a baby Galron. It's only level 1, maybe level 2, not getting that big of a boost. And then in combination with 2 officers that aren't really doing anything for the ship to increase its mitigation or to really help its damage output, it ends up losing the fight. And if you're going to run something like a speed crew, you have to be cognizant of this. And at the end of the day, I know what they're doing. They're trying to go for max speed with Burnham and Saru. But at the end of the day, was that the best loadout? Probably not. You could have done something similar with the same group of officers and gone with, hey, let's take a look at that group real quick. I know I'm burning through time, but let's take a look at that group. So we've got this group right here. So you see Burnham, we got Killy, Lorca. Let's look. Terran Empire. They're pretty scary. Then we got Discovery. What would you rather have? Would you have Michael Burnham having a little bit plus synergy with more speed, or Michael Burnham with then Killy and Lorca, you know, combining to give you that hull breach so that you can run higher mitigation stats? Quick thinking. You know, I mean, I understand that it's the Terran Empire and you're splitting up, but if that's what you're wanting is speed, maybe you go with something like that. Or you could go with, you know, Giorgio, which is going to give you that, you know, boost in speed you're looking for, because Discovery crew. But now you have burning, and what can we do with burning? A lot of things. We can actually do Ash Tyler right next to there, and oh, look, more synergy, and that's going to increase your attack by a heck of a lot more. And that's only a tier 2 Ash Tyler. Heck of a lot more. And Saru's going to help your defense by the way that he grows. So at the end of the day, there's always a better crew if you end up on this video. Well, that doesn't mean that it was awful, and we can see the vision of where they were trying to go. Let's keep it moving. This one was a cloaked enemy, but we have the name hidden anyway. Kumak, Grush, and wow. So that's really kind of all we're going to say about the first character. So the first character on the screen honestly doesn't need to be there at all. There's really no reason for that. If come down, it's not Kamal, is it? Yeah, it is Kamal. Wow, you don't see that very often. Negative 50% to kinetic weapon damage from enemy players. You don't really see this card ever get used even in low levels. The truth is, because he sucks. He's just not very good. He's not worth it. He doesn't provide you really any good stat boost. You don't use this. Now, obviously the player who was the Gladius here is going to think that they're fine, maybe because they won, but they beat a poor little Horizon and should have never taken any damage at all from it, because they're the attack ship. I mean, they're an actual warship going against a miner. And let's move on to the Kumak aspect of it, which Kumak could be a fantastic officer if loaded out correctly for low-level gameplay because of his officer ability, Watch the World Burn. As long as the enemy is burning, increases the armor, shield deflection, and dodge of the ship. So he's a mitigation raiser. With Discipline, he's going to increase the stats of officers each round by 5%, so it's one of those, you know, cumulative growth things. But you need burning to really take advantage of Kumak. A captain's ability really helps when because you're stat stacking for abilities, which is like what you're doing with things like, you know, Zhao or, you know, Ash Tyler, who we were just talking about. For any officers that we're going to use that's going to really, really help grow those stats. And then you end up with Grush, which is a warp range. So at the end of the day, this is such a mishmash that's why it comes off as not that effective. Mishmash can work. I'm not saying that it can't. We've seen it work before, but when you're looking just at everything, fight or flight, increasing warp range by a small percentage. For me, it's 8% because I'm at tier 2. And then you've got this really, really, really baby PvP officer that doesn't even get used in the teens. And then Kumak without burning, it just simply doesn't work as a whole as well as it could potentially. So let's move on to another one. We want to keep it moving. Let's move on to our final one. Bam. All right, we've got a big boy fight now. We got a Katinga versus a Kelvin. Now, Kelvin on the right side, this is a great example of why I'm always pushing Spock does not belong on 4-star or higher grade ships, because the amount of shields that he can regenerate are just so low. He can't really help you, especially going against a properly tiered ship. Now, in every way, the Kelvin should have the advantage here. And what I mean by that is they're same tier. Yes, you do have a little bit more research on the Katinga, or at least better officer stat layout on the Katinga. Remember, battle power really doesn't matter. The Kelvin should have a natural advantage when it comes to mitigation. So the Katinga's mitigation should be lower because it's a battleship going against an interceptor. So it has the triangle advantage. But if you look over on the right, it tried to use 5 to raise its own mitigation, which we really don't have that big of a problem with. But it tried to go Kirk Spock for shield regen. And this as an ability in the 20s, 30s, or teens is a fantastic run. It is very, very useful. But when you move it to the big boy levels, which is where you're at in the 40s and 50s, here, let me decrease this on the screen. It doesn't really matter anymore. So let's look at a logical. This is Spock's ability. We talk about this. It's so good in low-level PvP fights. When the ship has morale at max, a 750% of the defense of the officers on the ship regeneration to the shields. Now, let's just say you had, 50,000, 100,000 stats, and you could stack ridiculously high. The most you're really going to see a Spock regenerate is what? 250, maybe 350,000 shields per round. Well, let me promise you, these 4-star ships are hitting a heck of a lot harder than that, and that's really not going to end up helping you. So you're just kind of wasting your time. As you can see here, what you really need to focus on is increasing damage, critical builds, doing things like the Katinga is doing. Why is the Katinga having so much success? Going against the battle triangle, which is a truly natural advantage. Let's pop it on back. Let me tell you why. So you've got Gorkon as captain. Now, Gorkon's ability means that he's going to try to get you a critical as soon as possible, which would seem like it's counterproductive to Honor Guard Worf, but it's not. They're actually working in conjunction, and the reason being is you want that critical in the first round to start Hull Breach, which is Gorkon's second ability. Now, why is Hull Breach important? Hull Breach is important because when you have a critical, Hull Breach is another damage multiplier on top of that. So when you hit a critical, you can go to your ship and it'll say like, oh, you get 180% or 200% or whatever bonus percent to critical damage, because that's how much more damage you're going to get. So if you had damage, let's say your damage was 1 and your critical bonus was 200%. So it's 1 times 2, you got a 200% bonus. But now we've got a third multiplier in Hull Breach, which is a 1.5. So you're adding base damage or calculated damage. This is all the damage with research, etc. You get that, then you multiply it by the critical, then you multiply it by the Hull Breach bonus, and that's why this Katinga is pumping out ridiculous amounts of damage, which is why Spock can't keep up. And then you combine that with Kang, which is basically the anti-interceptor piercing officer. So he lowers the enemy's mitigation. That Kang, if maxed, and I'm pretty sure it's maxed given by the result of this battle, is going to easily negate that 5 of 10. So at the end of the day, crews matter. And this video was a little bit long, but hopefully it was educational enough to inform you on what you need to do and what is working for you. Like the video if you haven't already. Smash the like button. Sorry, that's a comment box. My bad. Do those too, but also like the video if you haven't already. That looks like the thumbs. See this thing? There's the box down there. It's over there now. Thumbs up if you haven't. Hit subscribe and ring the bell to get notified every time we go live, every time we have a video come out, anytime we're making content for you for Star Trek, because we do love this franchise. If there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. Live long and prosper. Stay safe for those Space Cowboys. Deuces, that's me. I'll catch you on the next video. We outie.
An even better outro than the intro. For the Empire and glory to your house.